Hello, and welcome to another episode of Surfing Your Edge. I am here today with my very first guest for the show. Her name is Jennifer Britton, and I think you're going to love her. Jennifer is an award-winning author, coach, educator, and founder of Potentials Realized, where she spent more than 20 years working with leaders, coaches, teams, and entrepreneurs worldwide. She's a pioneer in group and team coaching and has written 8 books. She's about to release a brand new book called Flow Flex Scale: 9 Catalysts for Thriving as a Solopreneur. And drawing on her early leadership work with the United Nations and decades as an entrepreneur, Jennifer brings a fascinating perspective on the future of work, human connection, sustainable growth, and creating meaningful impact. I hope you love our conversation. Let's get surfing. Okay, I am so excited to have Jennifer with me today. Jennifer Britton, you are one of my little heroes, and you don't even know it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for being here today. This is actually going to be our first in-depth one-on-one conversation. We've been in many Zoom rooms together, and we've followed each other, through those rooms and groups we've contributed to. But this is my first time having you all to myself.
I'm excited, Christine. Like I know from your work and our conversations, just like how important the work is that you're doing right now and in helping the world, helping all of us, surf our edges. Certainly we're in a moment where our ability to do that, to just sort of stretch out and get out of our comfort zone is key. And I'm really looking forward to sitting down and yeah, having a conversation because I think there's a lot of adventures we can zoom into today.
There absolutely are. So I just read your super impressive bio to everyone. And as we just discussed, you and I off camera, you started your business on April Fool's Day in 2004. So you have a deep business experience to pull from. And I want to talk to you about that today, but I also want to talk to you about your personal mission on the planet and why you're here and what might be shifting for you.
I love it. Love it. I hope everyone's ready to buckle in for some stories because I am come from a long lineage of storytellers, actually, oral historians, as my grandmother was known for. And she lived till the ripe old age of 99. So in my mid years, I'm hoping there'll be many more books and oral stories to come out from my mouth.
Awesome. Do you want to tell us about the current book that you're writing? Or I'm sorry,
Yeah.
the
Well,
book that's written and about to be birthed.
well, I have two. So as a writer, a little bit, you heard my bio, right? I'm a woman. I guess in today's world, we call them my multi-hyphenate, right? That is the current term. I think of myself as a multidisciplinarian. So I always have multiple projects on the go. And so coming out this in the next month or so, depending on when you're listening. So let's call it sort of late summer, early fall 2026. Flow Flex Scale, the Solopreneurial Operating System for Business Growth and Momentum, is coming out. This is a book that has been 6 years in the making, actually. It's gone through many iterations. I first started penning it in July of 2020 as part of an annual well, you know this, but I'll share this with your guests. I write every July for 72 hours with a group of about 50 other writers. We do 72 hours of nonstop writing for adult literacy. And so my 2020 manuscript that came out that year was what is now FlowFlex Scale. But in those days, it was called Drovepreneur for digital, remote, online, virtual entrepreneurs. And literally the title stopped me. So there were other books that came out. And I just didn't know what to call this body of work. And about 18 months ago, in the business coaching work that I do, it became really apparent because we'd started these conversations in 2017, but it was like, there's really 9 areas. So, like, why not bundle them as Flow Flex Skill? So, here it is, a year after that major sort of shift, which I hope we'll sort of talk about that because I think as seasoned professionals, as new professionals, we're always iterating, right? The world is
Mm.
always asking for something new. So, with that, let me turn it back to you. As you can see, I'm a seasoned podcaster, so I love talking. So back to you, Christine.
Um, So you mentioned that the world is always shifting. And it's
Yes.
interesting to me that you started this particular book in 2020 when the world was undergoing a major shift.
Yeah.
And I was one of those people that was really hoping we would harness what we learned in that time to create a
Mhm.
slightly different world together
Current
as
story.
humans.
Yeah.
And I don't think we did. I think we just
Mm.
pushed play again and we went right back as fast as possible to where we had been before. And here we are in 2026, and I feel like we are revisiting several of those themes again. And the world is changing rapidly. Um,
Mhm.
we are finding uh, power is, I think, becoming ever more concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. And that power is not necessarily working in the benefit to benefit all life on this planet. Um,
Mhm.
and people are starting to feel, I think, less and less secure in their lives and in the decisions they're making. And I'm feeling like many of us are kind of holding on, right? We're going
Mhm.
to wait
Mhm.
this out. We waited out COVID.
Now let's wait it out. And it's really interesting. So I'll put a couple of pieces on the table, right? Because your guests may or may not know this about me. So two things. One, I'm currently working on a new book. So the next book is actually about coaching for the future of work. So for the last few months, I spent a lot of time looking at the research and looking at these emerging trends. The second data set I think that is important is my former work, right? What I did before starting this business in 2004. And that was really working, as you know, in the field of international development, in helping countries articulate and realize their potential, right? That's why I call my business Potentials Realized, because that's been the body of my work since the early 1990s. And, I have a master's in environmental studies. So you and I have sometimes connected around this. And I think, my research work as a master's student was all about grassroots development. So as much as I think people are stuck right now, I think we also see glimmers of hope at the grassroots. And I don't think even in moments like this, and we certainly saw this in 2020, that the grassroots movements will always catch a fire, right?
Yeah.
Fire is my future self in coaching. And I think there's reason for that because I think I do see a lot of embers,
Mhm.
whether it's here in Canada, whether it's around the world with my connections. I see there, yes, there are definite moments of stuckness, but I also see some really interesting community-based movements. And I feel lucky, it's summer. I've had the chance to work out of sort of my little village in the world. It's a community of 300 people. And it's where my great grandmother was born in the 1880s. And, having that stability in place and space for me is really critical. Like, and my body knows it, right? Like my pulse rate has dropped 10 beats a minute for the last six
Mm.
weeks. As soon as I get on the land, like my body knows. And whatever is happening in the world, and this has been consistent my entire life, right? Even when I was working globally, I would come back to Canada. I'd usually have a month off or 6 weeks, and I would literally land, go to my parents' house, and then say, okay, we're going north. And I would spend all my time up north and then go back to the airport and fly off to my duty station. And people would be like, you must have had a really good time away. And it's like, yeah. And it's like literally the place in the world that I can get grounded. So I share that because I think with whatever is happening in the world, and my former work was rebuilding countries post natural disaster, post volcanic activity, post hurricane. These are really significant seismic transformations. And we need to say that we can't step over the shifts. And when people are ready, I think then that's where my work comes in. How do we envision again? How do we dream? How do we think about what's possible? And then what do we do? Even in micro steps. And that brings us back to flow flex skill because flow flex skill is about daily steps, consistent action, creating momentum. It's not these huge leaps, right? We might think it's a leap, but if we look at it backwards, it's these little pieces done consistently that really start moving the needle in good times and in disruption.
Okay, I'm throwing my questions away. We're just gonna follow.
We can go on. We can go to questions. We could go to whatever. Where what am I sparking in you?
No, I just well, just a whole bunch. One is I have three threads, I think. My original thread was I'd like us to discuss whether or not times of change are a good time for us to change. 'Cause,
Uh-huh.
I think I know you know what my answer is there. You just then talked about ways to keep yourself grounded and taking small steps. And then
Mhm.
is there a third? I think there's a third, but I'm going to hold on to that. So I'm just going to say straight out that I think that when everything is changing, that's a great time to change everything, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of us, it might feel like we can hold on and wait and things will go
Mm,
back to normal, and then we can take some steps that might feel uncertain.
mhm.
I would probably caution that that's not the right step to take to hold on. What do you think?
Such a great question. I think there's a couple layers to this. There's the personal, there's the professional, there's the societal, right?
Mm.
And I think depending on where you are in the world, there's a cultural layer to this as well. So, I can only speak from my own experience, but I think in moments of change, right? If we are holding too tightly onto the past, are we open to what door or doorways are opening for the future? And that's not easy, right? I know myself, I have always been on the front end of change, whether it's technological change, whether it's, and I think really it's technological change that has shaped my career. I remember vividly the day that the internet came in, and, I was managing over 100 staff and volunteers from 4 countries really in South America, and they were working in the north end of the Amazon. Our connection every day was by long range radio. Our radio would go on, and you think about those old MASH radios, right? If you think about the old MASH TV show, they used to have the radio guy, right? And so our radio would go on at dawn at like 5:30 in the morning. And it would run until dusk, about 7 o'clock at night. And that was a lifeline of connecting to these project teams. So I share it because, right, like what are the lifelines and what are we listening for? And if we're too stuck in the past, what happens? And so disruption happened with the internet. Prior to the internet, everything was done by long range radio. My headquarters was here in Canada. I'm like thousands of miles away. And, the facts literally disappeared overnight. We used to send out emails from the capital city. It would sit on a server at the University of the West Indies in Trinidad, and then it would be released to the rest of the world. This was like 6 months of my life, but it saved us thousands of dollars. All of a sudden, we had money that we could do things for a project, right? And so I say this because when things change, right, like new capacities become available, there's new things that are available. And I also know as a leader how many people find change really hard, whether it is technologically induced change, whether it's societal change. And so, again, how do we create environments where people feel like they are ready to move? I think that's another piece of this puzzle. And that's the role of leadership, hopefully, the role of leadership.
And it also ties in really well to what we were talking about in terms of grounding and how to
Yeah.
take the small steps. Like if change is scary for you, and it's scary for everyone,
Yeah.
but I think some of us are a little more tied into the possibilities that come with change. But regardless of where you are with your fear level around change, You said coming back to the land is one of the ways that you ground and regenerate and feel comfortable and confident and remember who you are. Do you have
Yeah.
any other suggestions for things you've seen work or
Oh,
other
yeah.
things you've tried?
Well, so again, I think journaling is an amazing one. For years, I journaled every night. I have a box, literally a huge big box, a red plastic tub of my memoirs. They will be my memoirs, right? Like of almost 15 years of journaling nightly, sometimes by candlelight because, it was a blackout. There was no power in the entire country, and I would have my candles going. So, I think journaling is a way to slow us down because in times of change, in times of fear, what happens? Our brains start to race. How do we slow it down to start making sense of the world, right? Part of change is also about creating a new language for ourselves, creating a new mental framework for how we see the world, how we perceive the world, how we see ourselves in the world. And so, as a
Mhm.
writer, right, this is where I think stories are really important. I think connections and conversations are really important. As much as I talk about being on the land, like I am very still at my age, I'm very deeply connected to nature, right? It's for me, it's about community and nature, and that's when I'm happiest, whether I'm, out walking or out like this morning, getting back to the gym and people are like, we haven't seen you in a few days. And it's like, yep, I've been away. They're like, you're looking good. And it's like, yeah, I feel really good because I'm able to follow my own rhythms. So like, I think in addition to getting grounded, journaling, like what are your rhythms? And part of Flow Flex Scale is really about helping people start discerning what is their natural rhythm. In my family, I am the early bird. My son is a night owl. He's 21 now, but like it's really interesting in our household. Two night owls and an early bird, like we operate in different times of the day as a family. And then there are moments when we come together as well, which how do we also allow for difference and distinction? And I think
Mhm.
that's part of today's struggle, right? Is, maybe not an appreciation of just how unique everyone really is and our unique rhythms and needs, right? So I sort of am sharing my story, but this could be very different. I know my pathway has been very different from others. And so what I'm sharing might not necessarily turn people's crank. So I'd invite your listeners to think, what is the thing that gets you grounded, regardless of where you are, what you're doing? It might be doing dishes, right? It might be playing the piano. It might be going out for a walk. So many things we can do.
Yeah, and I think one of the shifts that technology and the way work is moving is that we are now more able than ever to probably follow more of our own rhythms, to create our own rhythms, and create a life that feels good to us and doesn't necessarily fit into a mold that someone else handed us.
Yeah, and I think back to sort of where you were pointing us a few minutes ago, Kristine, of like, what has changed, what hasn't changed. Like you said, in 2019, I launched my first podcast. It was called the Remote Pathways Podcast. I had put a stake in the ground in 2019 saying, we are going to be shifting everything we do. It was, 20 late 2018, I put out a book called Plan, Do, Track. It was for virtual and remote professionals. The year before, my traditional publisher had said, not interested in your next book, Jan. It was called Effective Virtual Conversations. Like, the world isn't virtual. We're not interested. And I was like, well, I think the world is. And so I started my own media house, right? Like, and it was like, it was a quiet success until the pandemic. And, I really, as an advocate for remote work, flex work, I do still feel, and we are seeing pockets in the world where, flexibility is happening, whether it's because of economics, whether it's because of even places like Toronto, people have refused to go back to the office because they can't commute, right? Like you're going to get me to come in for, commute 3 hours a day to come into an office space where there is no space because you sold part of the landscape. It's a really interesting sort of moment. And I think we have the voice of the community and we also have the voice of leadership. And
Mm.
sometimes there is alignment, sometimes there's not, but that's part of the role of the leader. How does the leader listen and how does the leader bring people together to affect change?
Yeah.
So,
The theme I think we're for the conversation we're having today is a little bit about reinvention and reimagining.
mhm.
And I'd like to talk to you about where you are in your business and this year in particular, what do you feel is shifting for you?
Mm. What isn't shifting? Like, I think as a small business owner of many, many years now, like AI has been such an interesting disruptor, if we go back to that terminology. And I think it's creating opportunities. It's also creating massive changes. Like, I write in the area of coaching, right? It's been a big part of my life seeing the industry get born, see it grow, see it at a moment where it's looking to how do we find the feet, like what does coaching look like in the new world? And it's interesting because again, I think one of the most interesting things right now is and to reinvention, re-envisioning. I think we also want to watch out for like the echo chambers we find ourselves in. And one of the appreciations I have, and this is probably why I like to move around so much physically, like working out of different spaces, is because every time I shift, I become very aware of the lens, of the perspectives, of the voices in that space. And so it helps me question and challenge. Like I'm a critical educator by training. So it's part of the work that I do in the world, but it helps me look at like, is this an assumption or is this like the truth? And is this a perspective or is this my perspective? And so to come back to like what is changing in the business world, like so much is changing right now. And in one space that I work out of, it's very AI enabled, right? In other spaces I work in, supporting teams, like teams have embraced AI. They get frustrated with what's happening with AI. Other teams are like, we're not doing that at all. And so, as a coach, it's a really interesting moment to sort of say, what is going to happen? So, even yesterday, I had an invite from an entity and they wanted me to come and speak. And I said, well, is it important to talk about what is happening in the industry? Because we now have court cases, right? That there has actually been legislation passed of what happens in AI enabled landscapes.
Yeah.
And it is really interesting for the profession where, whether it's therapy or whether it's coaching, how many people have just jumped on the bandwagon of like, oh yeah, we're going to do this. And there now have been court cases which have set precedents to show that you have a responsibility to ensure confidentiality. If you're saying we're providing confidential spaces, you have a responsibility. So it's shakeups like this that are like, wow. And so for me, at 23 years into business, it's also a question of where do I put my focus? Um, 3 years ago this summer, it's almost 3 years ago to the day that I moved into this location. And so my son had just gone off to university and I let go of the big house because I didn't want to keep shoveling snow in the middle of winter. I was, like my heart has always been up north. So I moved midway between there and the cottage and still wanted to be close enough so that I could jump on a plane anytime I wanted. And of course, as soon as we moved, the phone calls came back and said, we need you back in the Caribbean. And it was like, okay.
Mm.
I'll get on that plane, not knowing sort of that first plane ride, just how much that was going to shift things. But it also means like, how do you keep all the plates spinning? So back to your original question of reinvention, like as the world changes, where do I want to put my attention? Do I want to keep doing what I've been doing for 23 years? And I think I'm really, at this stage clear. Like I would love to find a home. Part of my 2026 goal this year is to find a home for some of the training that we've been doing. Last year I was approached for a strategic acquisition of the business. I'm not ready to let the whole business go, but I'm ready to let parts of the business go. And in that time, it was not the right fit. But I do hope, and maybe your listeners out there, I do hope that sometime in the next 6 to 12 months that actually I'm able to find a home for some of my bodies of work so that they can live on in other people's hands. Because I don't know if we remain the same person all our life, right? I work in personal development and in leadership development. We can't stay the same. And if we try to stay the same, then, are we holding ourselves back? There's that sort of point of view too. So I think from a business level, AI is creating opportunity on all ways, whether it's about the human experience in AI enabled spaces or it's about the AI experience in AI enabled. And I'm certainly in the camp of the human, the human
Mm.
experience with potential, AI human collaboration, because that's another interesting area. But that's not group coaching, which I've been so well known for over 20 years.
I'm wondering how you know when things are shifting. I mean,
Ooh.
you're very clued in, obviously, but
I'm
I'm
very what? Clued in.
clued in. But I'm just
Maybe
you're
some days, but we still have blind spots. I would say that.
yeah,
But I think, if I can anticipate your question, is the question really like, how do you know when things are shifting?
yeah.
I love this question because I think it's going to sound, it probably will sound maybe a little bit more confident and clear than I've been thinking like the last 3 years. So back to this story of like reinventing myself. It actually started 3 years ago in totally uprooting community. I'd lived in that community for 17 years, raising a family, left everything, left all my habits, moved here and totally different environment, like different mix of people. And had also transitioned my parents, who I was a caretaker for. They both were declining significantly in the pandemic, and so much that we had to move them into our house. Um, you know, my dad was going through his final phase of life with stage 4 cancer, and there was a lot going on. So, to many of the things that we've talked about today, in terms of, finding your grounding, I had to practice what I preached, right? How did I find time to journal, to reflect, to go outside, to remember that there's a bigger world, and caretaking has been an important part of my world, but it's very easy to get sucked into as well. And
Mhm.
so with this transition, and it's not comfortable, right? Like I think anytime we do see people who grow, there's the messy middle, right? There's this, it's not even days, possibly not even just weeks or months. It can be years of like churning, right? It's not comfortable. And I still think there are parts of my continued evolution that aren't clear to me. They're getting clearer every day, but there's a lot of soul searching and a lot of, reflection on who am I, what's important to me. For me, as knowing my strengths, like legacy is always important. I do that through writing, but even my writing is changing, right? It's even my readers are like, but this book isn't just for coaches. And it's like, no, it's not just for coaches. And you know what? For the last 8 years, I've not just written for coaches. So it's taken 8 years for even the marketplace to recognize that shift, which I think, our identity, we see ourselves and then the world sees us as well. And so, how do we shift? We may shift before the rest of the world notices we've shifted too.
Mhm.
But it's not
Yeah.
comfortable. It's like the snake skin, right? And I use that analogy because there are a lot of snakes where where I am in the summer, and at least once a season, I'll see the snake skin on the rocks, right? Because the snakes live in the rocks. And when I see that, it's just a reminder like, oh, yeah, like what needs to be shed. But I don't think it's comfortable, right? Like I don't think a snake shedding its skin is probably a comfortable experience.
Yeah, I hear you on that. And for my own transitions recently, like starting this podcast, it started because a friend of mine who's a voice coach and a speaking coach came to me and said, I'm starting a network. I would really love you to
Nice.
podcast on it. Do you want to start a podcast? We're starting in 3 weeks. And I was like, oh,
Sure.
sure. Um,
Count me
so
in.
it's something that's been, percolating. I'd been doing live shows on Facebook for
Hmm.
years and I loved that. But it was, and it had been occurring to me that I needed to do it in a more planned and professional way. So it was the right thing. I'm not sure it didn't feel like necessarily the right time, but it was
Never
definitely the
does.
right offer.
Yeah.
And so I kind of have this vision of it being like a magic carpet. And instead of sitting on top of the magic carpet and flying, I'm like holding on to the back end of it. And it's just pulling me through the air. Um,
Well,
and it's
what a great metaphor, and bring it back to vision, right? Like I think it's interesting that you talk about the magic carpet ride because a year ago, 2020, I usually do business visioning work in the spring. And so it must have been 2024. I had this vision actually of a magic carpet ride too, but I wasn't hanging on the back, but I was like navigating on the front. And it's just interesting how, our roles also may shift. And sometimes, change is happening or our identity is shifting so much, it does feel like we're hanging on. And I guess in my work, it's always, well, what do you need to trust, right? How do you trust that wherever this journey is taking you, that it's going to be a good ride. Maybe not an easy ride, but it's going to be a good ride.
right, right. Yes, you will definitely learn something and find yourself in a different place on the other side.
Yeah, and to, one of the other themes that's sort of emerging in our conversation today is like, how are we with learning, right? Like, I think in today's world, we have to keep learning as well as we have to keep challenging our assumptions, right? To
Yeah.
grow means we have to learn. And learning is not easy. Learning is not neat, right? To really learn something new, we have to go back to beginner. And I remember actually 20 plus years ago become training to be a coach. And the first thing they would say is like, just learn to be a beginner, beginner's mind. But that's easier said than done. Because you know what? To go back to like kindergarten is it's pretty darn messy. And I've seen that again as a professional in even in my writing. Like I am a new fiction writer. I won't say new anymore because I've now got four. I'm working on like book four this Labor Day in an intensive spurt. But every time I write, they're getting better, right? They're getting better. And it's been a good reminder that, we can only learn something if we do it. And that too is
Mm.
at the heart of flow flex skill. It's about the daily action. You got to keep showing up. You got to keep pushing yourself. I saw it 3 years ago here, like reestablishing my routines. I was like, what do I want to need to do to be healthy, happy, you know, I'd achieved everything in my business and I'd achieved the house of my dreams, like where I live. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. I saw this house. I wanted it for like a year and a half. I rarely want anything, right? But this is like, I want to live there. And it just so happened a year and a half later that I got the property, even at a lower price, which was even better. And like I hadn't thought about, well, what does it mean to live there? Like, well, what do I need to be happy? Because winters are isolating, right? It's cold, it's isolating, it's on the lake, which is beautiful. But I'm a tropical girl, right? Like I love the 15 years I spent in the tropics. But we have to sometimes let things go. And who's to say everything is going to be forever? I think some people want the forever. I know for me, as my mother would probably say, Jennifer, you're a Sagittarius. You love adventure. And I do. I think the older I get, the more I realize if I don't have it, I'll create it somehow.
Which leads me directly into my next question, which is what is pulling you forward? What adventure do you see teasing you over the horizon?
Which theme do we put in the mix? I think there's a lot, right? So we're getting into that season change. Part of the transition that started 3, 4 years ago was my vision that like I wanted to be working out of my three Bs all the time, out of Barrie, where I live in the shoulder season, Baysville, beautiful Muskoka, which I work out of all summer, so April to September, I think this year. And then getting back to the Caribbean, right? Getting back to Barbados. And so we're coming into that season. Just yesterday, I was looking at flights and thinking, huh, if like what kind of work, right? What would take me there for short or long term? And as you know, I there's a big part of my heart that is still uh wanting to contribute to the global sphere. You know, my skills, I miss using my skills many days. I came back to Canada for two reasons. One, I lost vision in my one of my eyes permanently. I still have scar tissue, so I can't, navigate the world like I could have 30 years ago. And with technology now, I don't think I need to, right? Like I think I could do things that just weren't possible 30 years ago because of technology. But I also think, as much as coming back was not in my plan, and maybe this should have been an interesting story to have gone down. But, April Fool's Day 2004 was a very intentional day because I'd had this eye incident, as I like to call it, in 2002. I had just been selected for, after a year of interviews, I'd been selected for pretty much a lifetime diplomatic post as a young professional. There were 10,000 applicants, and 30 of us made it to an interview, and 15 of us were selected. And the day that the email came in was the day after my eye had happened. But as my loved ones say, if I had gotten that work, I probably would not physically be here, just knowing the way the world has turned out. And, the beauty of having the choice, I could have sat behind a desk. That wasn't me. I really felt the call to be an entrepreneur, to set up potentials realized, and starting afresh on April Fool's Day. The question was, are we cheating the universe, or is the universe going to laugh at us? And I didn't know. I didn't even know, like at that point, that 13 months later, my son, who is now 21, would be born. I never thought that I'd be a mom, but it's been like such a joy, such a wonderful part of my life. And you know me, I'm always talking about him because he's my best buddy, right? We were quarantine buddies, and it's just like, wow, like you don't know. I think sometimes you don't know. You can see it looking backwards, and maybe, I've on some parts saved the sort of this part of the story for the end of our conversation. But I would have had no idea in 2002 when my eye happened, just how differently my whole life would go. And I think even now there are days when I was like, I wish I could be like 30 again. I wish I could go and do what I love to do, and where I have made a really big difference, I believe, in the world. And I still make a difference in different ways, and I have a feeling my gut is saying, my heart is saying there's going to be another adventure as long as I allow for it to, right? Like I think there's an allowing in, we can't always see what lies ahead, but we have to trust. So
That was beautiful. Thank you. And I learned I have so many more questions that we don't have time for today. So I will
we
definitely be
got five
having you
minutes left,
back.
Christy. We can take a lot of, we can take a lot of.
I have a couple of questions for you. One I would like to ask is for our listeners, if someone is feeling that call to something different,
Mm,
um, and also feeling unsure about how it's going to go. What
Mhm.
advice would you give? Like, how do you find your way
Mhm.
forward from that place?
So I'm not gonna give advice because I'm a coach, but like
Right?
I would invite people to go back to their vision, right? Like what is the pull? Like there's so much more power in the pull versus the push, right? And I sort of say that if I use my eye as an example, right? Like I could have been pushed into sitting at a desk in New York City, and that was not, they were like, oh, you could sit in HR. And I was like, I don't really want to. I wanted the pull of like, I'm a creative. I've always known that about myself. People have recognized that in me. And I wanted to create a business. And I figured, what's the worst thing? Like literally, we said, what's the worst thing that could happen? Right? Part of my heart, and I think, certainly our family having like straddling Canada and the Caribbean, there's been a 20 plus year tension. And when we got a call a few years ago saying mom's in ICU, you got to fly back, it was like, there was no question. It was like, okay, we're going to get on the plane. But that was such an emotional plane ride to go. 20 years have passed. But as soon as our feet hit the tarmac, it was like, ah. And why? Because, like, I think there's a part of vision, right? Like, there's a part of vision and there's a part of who we are, regardless of how much time has passed. And I'm sure listeners all over have friends, family members that you might not have seen in years, even in a decade or two, where you can pick up. And while life is different, I think there's always a core of who we are that remains the same, regardless of the good and not so great experiences in life. Because it would be easy to listen to this and think, oh, everything is peachy keen, right? Not always, but how do we reframe? And I think that is part of the change process as well. It's very hard when we go through it. There are many things that we probably don't ever imagine will be part of the experience, but how do we translate that? How do we readjust the way we look at it? Because every experience helps us grow, as easy or as painful as that is. And so I think what the advice is not advice. It's go back to your vision. What do you want to create? And go back to who you are. Like, what's going to make you happy? What's going to make you have moments of joy, experience awe, which in hard times are hard to do. I think my learning in the pandemic, when this business was 10xing and I was also responsible for my parents, and it was a legal responsibility, but it was also, a joy to be there and have a business that even today allows me to go in and see my mom, who's so well cared for, but I can spend time. And I know, like, I've been a fixture there for like 3 years. When I go in, everyone knows me. And my mother, whose cognitive decline is such, she's always like, everyone is so happy when you come, Jennifer. And it's true because, again, it's a different perspective, right? I come into their world, which is an amazing world, but it's very heavy, very, very heavy. So, again, maybe we only got one more question in. So,
That's okay. Actually, I'm gonna ask you one more, and that is, what edge are you surfing right now?
gosh, what edge am I not surfing? I think the biggest edge that I'm surfing is, I'm going to put it simply as this: it's continuing to hold the multiplicities of life. I think that is really the edge. And know that it's okay. Because I think we are in a world that likes to simplify. We're in a very complex world, but this is the world that I have always navigated. And so when I've been told, oh, you can't do multiple things, it's like, no, I can. And actually, it makes me very happy. So I think that is the edge, to be an advocate for multiplicity, to be an advocate for also like trusting, because I
Mm.
think in not knowing, it's easy to get fearful, it's easy to be unsure. But when we can trust, whether it's self-trust, trust in others around us, trust in a greater power, That's when I think we can be of service, which is really key to who I am as a human. Thank you again for having me. I do need to head on out, but I will see you soon and hope that the listeners have enjoyed today's conversation.
Alrighty, and I will see the rest of you in another week. And until then, I am wishing you wonder.
Take care, everyone.
Before we go today, I wanted to come back to a few things that Jennifer said that are still stuck spinning in my head that I think you might want to remember as well. One is her description of the messy middle of reinvention. We might feel like we're changing, and yet the rest of the world is responding to an older version of who we are. So we're always playing this game of tug of war and waiting for the rest of the world to catch up with who we feel we are in any moment. I also loved her question, what needs to be shed? And this is a big one because a lot of times, sometimes, maybe not a lot of times, sometimes the thing we're being asked to release isn't something that's failed. It may be something that we've built beautifully. It may still be working. It might be something we're known for. It might be even something that we still love, but that no longer contains all of who we're becoming. Sit with that one for a minute. And then finally, there was Jennifer's reminder about the power of the pull versus the push. And for this one, it means coming back to what makes us feel alive, what brings us joy or awe, and trusting those clues even when we can't see exactly where that road would take us. So, if you'd like to stay in Jennifer's world, I highly recommend you do. Look for her forthcoming book, Flow Flex Scale 9 Catalysts for Thriving as a Solopreneur. You can also find Jennifer J. Britton on LinkedIn and listen to her on the Flow Flex Scale podcast, Coaching Many, and the Remote Pathways podcast. I'll put all of those links along with Jennifer's other resources in the show notes. And I will leave you with this question for the week. What is pulling you forward so strongly that you might be willing to shed an old version of yourself in order to follow it? And until next time, I am wishing you wonder. Thank you for surfing your edge with me on your way to becoming your bigger, bolder, badass self. This week, choose one idea from today's show that made you curious or furious, challenged you, or made you want to try something different. Play with it and see what happens. I've always got a special gift for you, so click the link below to find out what it is and come back next week to catch a brand new wave. Until then, I am wishing you wonder.